Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of my Bigfoot sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
My Bigfoot sighting, me and my husband's, started in 2017. It was in the spring, late April, I believe. I looked up in a tree as I was feeding my birds out on my back deck, and there was a little structure up in the tree, about 20 feet away. Well, I didn't know what to think of it. I just looked at it and thought, And I didn't know if I really believed in Bigfoot or not either. It's just, I'd heard some things about it. I lived in California when I was young, and I heard about the Patty thing, which happened not too far from where I lived. So I didn't know what to think, and I went to my husband and I said, would you come and look at this strange thing in the tree? And I'm wondering if it could be like a Bigfoot or something, because it just didn't seem right to me. He looked at it and he said, oh no, it's just happened naturally there. So I said, okay, I'll just forget about it. And a couple of days I kept looking at it. Didn't fall out. It just stayed up there. So I went to my husband again and I said, Dan, are you sure that's just natural? And he kind of got perturbed at me. He grabbed his video camera and he went off into our backwoods in back of our house. And he wanted the video. He told me later that he was just mad at me. He wanted to show me there were no Bigfoot in this area and they weren't coming to our house. They didn't even exist. Well, he was gone for a couple hours. And when he got back, I looked at his face as he came in the door. I said, no, you didn't. And he said, yes, I did. Therefore, we looked at the videos that he had just made, and there were several nice big structures. You could tell that they didn't happen naturally. They were built. And so then we went out in our backyard to see if we could see any other structures right in the backyard. We live in southern Illinois, and we live in the hills. Our house sits right on the side of a gully, ravine type thing. The back of the house is about 5 or 6 feet off the ground, and our deck sits up about 4 or 5 feet off the ground. So it was all hilly down there, and we just didn't see, humans walking back there. I can't even walk there in the daytime. It's so steep and lots of brush and things down there. So anyways, we're looking down in there, and all of a sudden we come up on this place behind the wild rose bushes. I'll tell you more about this wild rose bush later on. But behind that wild rose bush was well worn down, and you could tell that something had been sitting there. So we got kind of scared about that, and we found a few other little signs that they were there. There was a path going up to the rosebush hiding place. We just kept looking around, and we just kept thinking, oh boy, they're coming to our home. What are we going to do? And then we started looking back over. His mom and dad owned this property. They bought it like over 60 years ago, built their house on it, raised the kids on it, Dan, my husband included. And there were some strange things that happened to them over the years. So we kind of figured they were probably here a long time. And They hadn't bothered anyone, hadn't hurt anything. No one even knew they were here. So we kind of lost our fear and decided, well, what are we going to do with this, you know? And finally our curiosity about these creatures got the best of us, and we decided we were not going to try to make them go away. We weren't going to put cameras up. We weren't going to shine bright lights or, you know, fire guns at them or anything. All we did was put a microphone up in our window off our back where the gully was. So we put the microphone up, and sure enough, that night we went to bed and laid there listening. We had the microphone through a transmitter, and we could listen to whatever happened out there over our little FM radios with headphones. We could hear real good. And that night they came. And, you know, they sneak up, they come up. We'd hear one walk. Well, first off, what would happen is we'd hear owls hooting, and then the dogs would start barking, all the neighbor dogs. And then as they got clearer, we could hear them whistling, doing some whistling. And then we'd start hearing the footsteps, the heavy foot treads coming up. They'd come up one at a time. One would come up, and he'd either stand or sit there for a few minutes. And then we would hear the other one. He'd come up whistling, and they'd whistle back and forth. And then another one would come up, and they'd just sit out there. They were watching us, I guess. So we went through that a few nights, and Dan, he's such a perfectionist, he decided he hadn't gotten a good enough video of the structures out in the woods. So he takes the camera out there, not twice, but 3 times he was out there looking at those structures, explaining what the structures were to the camera, and we think they saw him looking at their structures. Because the next day he went out there, he found all the structures that he found destroyed, broken down. So we didn't know what to think about that, you know. Why would they destroy their own structures? And finally I began to think that maybe because Dan was looking at them, they were upset, and they might have figured that if we tear the structures down, he won't come out in the woods anymore. We don't really know why they did that, but that's what I'm kind of leaning towards. So anyway, that night they came, but they came in a different way. This night they were real loud. They didn't sneak up. They were stomping on the boardwalk we have across the back of our house, so we can walk on that hill. We can walk out in back of the house there. They were stomping, they were breaking big sticks, whistling, and kind of talking. We couldn't really, it was low and guttural, so we really couldn't hear too much of what the words were, but I think they were speaking in their own dialect. Well, that went on for about an hour or two, and we just laid there. We were in bed, and we just didn't get up. We didn't make a sound. We just laid there listening to what was going on. And I think really they might have been testing us out to see what we would do, you know. Would we be aggressive towards them if we knew they were coming? They did not know we had the microphone. So they were making noises loud enough that we could hear them from just our normal ears. Well, that went past, and we thought, well, they might not come anymore. But sure enough, they wouldn't come every night, but maybe every 2 nights, and then they wouldn't come for like 5 or 6 days. Sometimes a week would go by, we wouldn't hear them. But we kept listening, and we heard them doing all kinds of things. We heard them breathing, we heard them eating something, breaking sticks, whistling, belching. We heard them doing all kinds of things. So we got used to that. And they just seemed to make themselves at home here. And as time went by, I thought, oh, we need to do something else, you know, because they could do that for years. So one night I got up out of bed and I went to the door, and it was open just a little crack. for air. That's the one thing I'll explain to you later about how we felt about open windows and doors. But anyway, I went there and I said, "Hello, I know you're there." I told them, "We are your friends, and you're welcome to come here as long as you respect us and all of our things. You're welcome here." I told them that we knew they were coming for a long time and that they didn't need to change that, but they just needed to respect us. And I said, "Thank you," and I went back to bed. Now, I know that sounds crazy to you people listening, but this is the way I reacted, and I'll just continue on with that. But anyway, so this went on for a while. They kept coming back, and I kept going out on the deck, and well, finally I went out on the deck when I got brave enough and talked to them. I just figured fear is what's going to be the worst in this relationship, because if we fear them and we do things to make them fear, we're not going to learn anything from them. You know, I wanted to try to develop a relationship with them. And so that's what we slowly did. I kept talking to them. They kept coming. And it went on like that for a few weeks. And then one night I was laying in bed, half asleep. I had the earphones on. But all of a sudden, my headboard is there's a closet behind my headboard, and there's about 5 feet in between the outside wall and my headboard. And I heard a tap, and I thought, what is that? You know, and then I realized one of them was right outside, and they tapped on the wall. So I thought, what can I do? So I went on my headboard, I went, "Tap, tap. I know you're there," I was saying. And this continued on. Every time he would come up to the house, I'm assuming it's this one that I'll tell you about in a minute, he would tap one time and I'd tap 2 times. And I think he was doing that to tell me, "I'm up here, don't come to the door, don't get out of bed and come to the door. I'm up to the house. I will be uncomfortable with you coming to the door at this time." What he wanted to do is my bedroom wall is facing our garage and chicken house wall. And he wanted to go up in there. It was gated off at the front. He wanted to go up in there and look at the things that Dan piled up in there. Dan would put lawnmowers, tanks, you know, whatever things from his job, and he would just put them up in there until he could store them away or whatever. So he would go up there, and I would hear him in between the house and the garage fooling with that stuff. He'd pick something up, put it down, or fiddle with something, and he just loved doing that. Well, that went on for a few weeks. So then all of a sudden, we find out that he's going out into the front yard. See, we live kind of out in the country. There's no street lights out here. There's only people's porch lights. So we don't keep our porch light on. Dan he likes to go out there at night and sit. He doesn't like the porch lights, so he just leaves we don't turn them on. We don't leave them on. And this young Bigfoot was going out there. He liked our cars. He started leaving handprints, fingerprints, and one time he even left us a picture he drew, a little doodle art thing, on our car window. Well, his personality was starting to come out. Dan, this is what's sickening to me. Dan made some recordings, okay, off of the microphone. And he put them somewhere in some file so he could go back and listen to them later on, because we had so much going on with what they were doing that he didn't record it. Well, anyway, he dug around and he did find this one recording, and what it is a sound. What you hear on it is you hear a big crack, and then you hear a whoo, and then you hear this big, deep voice say, "Tomas." When we heard that, we flipped out, and I said, "Dan, you know what that sounds like?" Dan says, "Yeah, I know exactly what it sounds like. The young Bigfoot that's going out to the car made a noise, cracked that plastic sound, and the big one, which we think is the papa, he was scolding him, saying, "You're making too much noise." Well, that's the way we interpret it. But anyway, that is what we think happened. And when the Bigfoot, the papa, we think, said Tomas, that's where I got the name for the young Bigfoot. The one that likes the cars, the one that doodle arts and goes out front and fools around out front. He's left little structures out in front. We have a fish pond out there. And we had at that time, we had a tank of fish. Dan was doing some hydro gardening, using fish, and the water was circulating into a vat where he had plants growing into this media. Well, anyway, we had fish in one of these tanks, and we had a net there. One morning we went out there, and the net was gone. The side of the tank was all wet, and when we looked in, the fish, half of the fish were gone. The goldfish, they were goldfish. So we found the net down into the woods a little ways. So apparently, we think the young guy went on a little fishing expedition and got a few little snacks of the goldfish. His personality was just kind of coming out to us with the car thing and everything. So we put up a gifting shelf, and we decided we were going to put some toys out there for them to look at or play around with or whatever. We went to Walmart, and we found this little red car, the same as our car. We have a red car. So we bought that little thing, and the wheels are ones that you can wind it up, and then the wheels, go, and you can run it along the ground or whatever. It was out there a couple of days on that shelf, and one night I heard those wheels whirring. Over and over again, I heard those wheels turning, and I started laughing because I thought, oh my Lord, he's found the little car, and he knows what to do with it. So he plays with that car like that. And so his personality is getting stronger and stronger. The only thing he ever took off of that gifting shelf was I put a red rock out there, and we put a little plastic star that glowed in the dark. He took those, or one of them took those. I don't know exactly which one, but I think Tomas took it. He likes the color red. And the little star glowed in the dark. And we never found him. We looked all over this place. Never could find him on the ground or anything. So that's the only things except for fruit, that they have taken from us. Everything stays here. The toys, always, they'll play with them and move them around. They're always on the gift shelf in the morning. Funny story I have to tell you about the little red car is, well, every morning Dan, before he went to work, sometimes it was, when the sun first came up, he'd go out and look to see if anything was moved or taken off of the gift shelf. It's fastened to the deck out and back of the gift shelf. So one morning he was out there, and things had been moved around, and the little red car had its back kind of shoved up into the corner of the gift shelf. And Dan picked it up, and those wheels started turning and whirring. Dan said he dropped the little car. He was so startled. And when I heard about it, I said, yeah, I bet that young guy was down in the bushes in the gully there watching you as you picked up that car. He probably thought that was pretty funny. So continuing on with the story, so many things happened. I think one of the most interesting things that happened is that he started making glyphs around the house. He left some on the deck, and he started playing the stick game with Dan. Dan would go down and take sticks and maybe write his name or something, or, make figures with it. And the next day he'd go out, it would all be reconfigured. And sometimes there would be these glyphs. Well, one day I went out there to feed the birds, and on the steps was this glyph. It was an A glyph. I think maybe some of you have seen those glyphs on some of the people's things they put on YouTube and stuff. But anyways, we've got it all recorded. And he did other glyphs. He did one in front of my door. It was an X with a stick underneath the X. And what that means, I do not know. But they were doing the glyphs. He was doing the glyphs. And we believe that he is the main one. He is the one that interacts. He has the family. They come. We know that he brings the baby. I'll get into that later. But they all come, but he is the one that's doing the stuff, mainly. He really does want to communicate and contact with us, as I've described the little games. Dan loved the one where he would, every morning he'd walk out in the backyard and down to the gully, and all the maple branches, the tips of them would be tied in together, interlaced. And so Dan would go walking through there, and those things would spring apart. It wouldn't be the wind, because a lot of the times here in the summer, the wind doesn't blow. And this would be every time Dan would go down in there, he'd find these branches tied together like that. And Dan would untie them all. And then the next morning he'd go down there, they'd all be tied up again. So it's really interesting, some of the things they do. They do some really, how do I say, not in your face things, not blatant things, you know. They do things, it's like they try to get you to notice. And Dan's really good at noticing the small things. We call it the small things. And Dan is really good at noticing that stuff. So anyways, this went on for a while, and I'm trying to think what came next. I think that the next thing to happen was that Dan, we had chickens, and the chicken house is not too far from the back deck on the side of the garage. This was in early 2017 that this happened. Dan, we had about, I guess, 25, 30 chickens. I can't remember exactly how many. And every night he would count them before he would lock the door. And he had 2 latches that only a human hand could operate. So we'll get that clear right now. He counted them, he put them in. It was cold January. He didn't want to leave any outside to freeze to death, or, the predators get them. And the next morning when he went out there, he opened the latches, opened the door, and he noticed that 3 of the chickens were gone. Well, we talked about that. What neighbor would steal our chickens? See, this is before we knew about the Bigfoot. That happened the next spring. So we were accusing the neighbors and wondering what neighbor it was, and blah, blah, blah. Well, finally, that kind of went by. And then it was in the spring that I noticed the first structure in our tree in the backyard. So another thing that happened before we knew they were here is in the fall of 2016. It was nice weather. I had the door cracked and my bathroom window open. It was about 11 o'clock. I was trying to get ready to go to bed. I was washing my face, standing there. And all of a sudden I heard this whistle, like someone trying to get your attention. Well, I just stood there. I was frozen. And then I heard, hello, a young man's voice saying hello, real friendly. And I started getting really mad. And I thought, oh my gosh, some neighbor is doing the creeper thing and Tom peeping in my window. I was really mad. But I'm kind of cool in a pinch there. I kind of keep my head. I decided I was not going to let him know that he scared me. So I just ignored it. I just thought, I'm just going to ignore it. I'm not going to give him the pleasure of knowing he scared me. So I just turned the light off, closed and locked the door, and got in bed. And I lay there, watching for the flashlight, listening for the steps, because the window was still open. I heard and saw nothing. I laid there for a long time, not a peep. And I thought, wow, how did he do that? How did he get away without me hearing or seeing a flashlight? Well, he could have had night vision, I guess. But on the side of the hill, in the brush, and no, I don't think so. I would have heard something and seen a flashlight if he didn't have night vision. Well, so that went by. That was in October of 2016. Then the chicken thing happened, and then that April, after the January, the chicken thing happened, then that April is when the structure happened, and Dan went out into the woods to see if there was anything out there, and you heard the story how he did find the structures. Well, I just needed to go back a little bit there to explain to you that other things had happened before we even knew it. His family even had some things, I think, going on there, but I'm not going to speak about what happened to them. I don't have their permission to speak about it. Well, anyway, so as time goes on, I'm talking to them on the deck. Things are just not progressing very much, One suggestion, by this time I was getting on, looking at the Bigfoot groups and trying to see, what I could do, what advice people would give me and stuff, One person said, well, it might be they speak a native language. So I thought, well, Cherokee is probably a language pretty widespread. So I thought, I'm going to try to speak Cherokee to them. So I got on YouTube and I found a man who was giving Cherokee lessons, and I learned some greetings and some things to say to them. So one night I went out there and I was speaking to them this greeting. I greeted them in Cherokee. I can't even remember what it was anymore. I can't remember it. But they responded by, I think it was mouth pops. One part of the yard I heard a mouth pop, and then on the other side of the yard I heard, and then somewhere else I heard like a mouth pop. It was like a clap, only it sounds hollow. It doesn't sound like a clap. It does sound like a clap, but more hollow. I can't explain it. So I thought, well, what does that mean? Did they like it that I spoke Cherokee? Was it approval, or was it, I'm sure they were laughing at my Cherokee if they did speak Cherokee. So I continued to do that, but I never hear anything from that at all. I also started begging him to say hello like he did that October night. I kept begging him, say hello like you did before. And I never heard anything. And then after a while, one night I was asking him to say hello, and I just heard this beautiful flute sound, just one note of this, one long note, like a flute. And that's all I could get out of him. It's just no hello, no hello. So I thought, well, okay, he's not going to talk to me. Well, one night I asked him again, please talk to me and tell me hello. Nothing. I turned around to go back to the house, and just as I was opening the door, I heard this man's voice say, "Gwa, gwa." What does that mean? And I thought, well, what does that mean? Say hello. But that's the only two words that I have heard them personally speak. Now I'll tell you how Dan had his first sighting of this young guy, we think. One night we'd gone to bed, and Dan heard this weird clunking noise and voices talking. And we have a spare bedroom that I grow orchids in. And we keep the shades up so that the light comes in, and I don't have to keep opening and shutting the shades. So Dan got up real quiet out of bed. He didn't turn the lights on. He sneaked into that spare bedroom, and he looked out the window. And in our yard, we have some bushes towards the neighbor's house. And it was late fall, so all the leaves were off the trees and the bushes. And what he saw was this figure crouching behind our hydrangea bush and peeking around the bush looking at these men working on the car. And Dan was so confused because he thought it was our neighbor at first, because our neighbor is a big guy. He's 6'5". He weighs about 300 or 400 pounds. And that's what Dan saw behind the bush. The porch light was on at the neighbor's house, so Dan saw more of a silhouette of this, because we didn't have our light on. But he saw the silhouette of this big, large figure crouching behind our bushes, peeking out, and he kind of paced back and forth, crouching, pacing back and forth a little bit behind the bush, and then he'd peek out again. And Dan said he was so confused he didn't know what to think. Well, the men got through working on the car, I guess, so they shut the hood of the car and started walking back to the house. Well, this figure behind the bush just rapidly walked back down into the woods. And Dan said that's the first inkling he had of who that was. It was not the neighbor. It was not a human, because they walked down into those steep woods without a light, without anything, just very rapidly walked down into the woods as the men went into the house. So that is Dan's sighting. He said he was big, large, barrel-chested, big head. He couldn't see the facial features, but he said he was just a big guy, at least as big as my neighbors. My husband is 6'4", so he's a big guy too. But he said he was big. And he said he just walked down into those woods with long strides, never even hesitated going down into the gully. So that's his story. Now, I'll tell you about my sighting. Mine was after Dan saw his Bigfoot. We think it was Tomas, what we call Tomas. I got really jealous. I wanted to see him too, you know. So I kept begging him when I go out there, please let me see you. Please let me see you. Just one time, just let me see you. Well, this went on for months. Got into winter time. And around my birthday, which is February 10th, I was asking him still. I forgot to get the bird feeders off the deck. It was like 9-ish and 10-ish, and I knew that the raccoons might drag the things down and break them again like they had that one. So I usually bring them in off the deck. Here it was, freezing cold. Oh, man, it was cold. And I went out there in my flannel nightgown, and I started getting the feeders down. And I don't know what made me look. I looked down into this gap between the trees, the only place I think I could have seen him that far away, through the woods. And I saw something there, and I looked, and I could see his eyes. And I focused in, and he was laying down on his stomach there, like he was doing a woman's push-up, sort of. He was supporting his upper body with his arms, doing a woman's push-up. And just looking at me. And he would blink, occasionally blink, but he didn't move. He didn't move a muscle. Just stared at me. And I kept looking. I thought, and then it dawned on me, well, that's him. I said, Tomas, hi, you let me see you. Thank you. Well, I was just gushing like a stupid woman, and I just kept talking to him and thanking him and looking at him, trying to gather what I could of his looks. And because he was laying down, I couldn't really see his height, but he was big. What impressed me most were his arms and shoulders. He was not bulky, but he was kind of built like a well-conditioned athlete. I could see his muscles. He was in nice condition, big. His hair was about, I think on his head it was like 6 inches long, and on his body it was shorter, but it was hard to tell. He was laying down, but I know his body hair was shorter. And his eyes were big, and he did have a mustache and a beard. I could see his mouth sort of underneath the mustache. But what's funny is his mouth didn't look like that long, slashy thing you see in a lot of the pictures of Bigfoot. It looked more like a human mouth, more voluptuous, or whatever you want to call it. And his mustache, here's what got me, is his mustache looked like it had been trimmed. It wasn't hanging over his mouth. It looked like it had been trimmed. And he had a nice beard. His eyes were big. You could see the brow ridge, but his hair, it looked like he had more of a forehead than you see. The hairline did not go all the way down to his brow ridge. He had a forehead. But what was really weird was his hair. It looked like he'd taken his hands and rubbed his hands up through his wet hair, and it was spiking up on top of his head. And I almost laughed because I was thinking, he looks like a punk rocker, for goodness sake. That is so funny. I just kept looking at that hair like that. But he just laid there and blinked. And all of a sudden, I was getting so cold. I was thinking, oh my gosh, I have to go in. I'm going to get frozen here in that flannel nightgown. And it was, I think it was like below freezing that night. But I didn't want to go in. But I just started shivering and shaking, and my voice was shaking, and my heart was beating fast. And so finally, I just thought, I have got to go in. So I told him good night and thank you, and I have to go in because I'm really cold. And I walked towards the house, and then I thought, no, I can't leave. I went back, and he was still laying there. And I stood there another few seconds, and then I said, oh, I've got to go in. So I walked back inside, and I got warm. And a few minutes later, I went back outside to see, but he was gone, of course. But when I think about that experience, I think, wow, I think he let me see him. He let me see him, and he let me see him in such a non-threatening way that I wouldn't be scared. Because I think these creatures really are, they really do understand that humans, to see what they are and see what they look like in their largeness, that humans are afraid of them, of their seeing them. So I think that's really why he let me see him like that. He didn't want me to be afraid. The only time I was ever afraid of him or any of them is a few weeks into this. I got a smart idea. It wasn't such a smart idea. I decided, at this time I thought they were just intelligent animals. This is before I really got to know them. So I thought, well, I'm going to see if they will miss my interaction with them. I just did not go out on the porch and talk to them, on the deck and talk to them. I didn't tap when he came up to the house. I just totally ignored him for a few days. I wanted to see, would they miss me? What would happen? Well, I found out what would happen. One night I gone to bed, and it was early morning, just before dawn. I heard a sound like no one wants to hear, and no one wants to be woken up with this sound. It was a roaring, I call it a groar, because it was more of a roaring, growling sound that just went through my body. I mean, I could feel it, the sound waves going through my body. I sat up straight in bed, and I didn't want to open my eyes because we have a big glass sliding door, and the door was even open a crack. And I was so afraid that if I opened my eyes, I would see him standing there at the door. And I just could not for the life of me face that. If I saw him standing there, I would have just had a heart attack. So I just sat there, and I just kept saying, I wanted to get up and run, but I just kept telling myself, don't scream, don't run, he'll go away, just sit there and be quiet, he'll go away. That's what I kept telling myself. And so I know it only lasted a few seconds, but it seemed like forever. And the sound just going through my body, it was just horrifying. And it stopped. I'm sure it was only a few seconds that he made that noise, but I sat there with my eyes still closed. I was still afraid I'd see him if I opened my eyes. And then all of a sudden, I heard him, his big footsteps walking away. I didn't have the earphones on at this time. This is something I heard because he was so close to the house. And as he walked away, I opened my eyes, and I could still hear his footsteps going off. The leaves were crunching. And I opened my eyes, and I could still hear his footsteps going off. And I thought, it is not a nightmare. This is real. He was really here, and he roared at me, And I knew why. I knew why. I thought, I hurt his feelings. Because that's what that sounded like. It was just kind of a hurt feeling. It was loud, but it wasn't an angry roar like a lion's roar. It was different. And I felt so bad, and I thought, man, I've done it now. He'll probably never come back again. That night, I got up. Couldn't even sleep. I got up and had coffee and thought about it. And so I thought, I got to tell him I'm sorry to fix this, try to fix it. That night I went out on the deck and I just poured my heart out and said, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry that I hurt your feelings. I didn't realize I would hurt your feelings. And I told him I would really try to never do it again, to please forgive me. And I couldn't hear anything, nothing. So I went ahead and went to bed, went to sleep. The next morning I went out to feed the birds, and I found this wonderful gift that he laid there on the deck for me. It was the outline of a Bigfoot, a big twig, a big long twig. And I don't know if he twisted it that way or if he found it. I don't know. I have a feeling that he made it because it was in the perfect shape of the head of the Bigfoot and the shoulders. And I knew exactly when I saw it what it was. It was from him. So that night I thanked him, I told him thank you and let's just be friends now. I'll never do anything like that again. And that's what's happened. We've just developed this friendship. He comes up to the house, taps. We had one other bad incident. We had the chickens, and Dan was listening on the earphones. I didn't have the earphones on at this time, but Dan heard it. He comes running into the bedroom. He had his pellet rifle. He says, something's in the chicken house. I'm going out there and check it out. So he runs out. And he comes back in and he tells me, there's a coon out there. I'm going to have to kill it. That's right. He didn't have the gun when he first ran out. He just ran out and checked. And he came back in to get the gun and he told me, there's a coon out there. It's got into the chicken house and it killed a chicken. So I was taking all this in while he was running back out to the chicken house. And I hate to see anything killed. So I ran to the back door on the deck and I opened the door and turned the light on all of a sudden, and I said, don't shoot it, don't shoot it. And I heard the pellet rifle go off, and all of a sudden, something down by the chicken house I just got a glimpse of it in the corner of my eye, just zipped. I think it was on all fours. It was low, zipped down to behind this big tree, and I didn't hear it, but Dan heard this woof. I didn't hear it because I was probably screaming and, I just didn't hear opening the door and stuff. I did not hear it, but Dan heard it over his earphones. It made a noise like, roof. So Dan scared him with that, I guess, because he knew he had the gun. And so I realized what was happening when I saw it go by, and I said, it's okay, Tomas, it's okay. He's not going to hurt you with the gun. He would never do anything to hurt you. And he just stayed there behind the tree. He never moved off any further that I could tell. And so that was the incident about the gun. And I'm sure he was probably thinking about that night he had creeped in and taken the 3 chickens. He's probably thinking, oh, that could have been me with the gun. But they do not like guns at all. That's the 2 times when there was some excitement around the Bigfoot. Okay, I'll tell you about giving them the fruit. It's kind of interesting. We decided that we weren't going to feed them per se, but we wanted to give them something every once in a while. So we decided to give them fruit. Dan rigged this bucket out, hanging from a tree. I think it was like 7 feet up in the tree, hanging on some line or something. I can't remember what he hung it with. But in this bucket, we put apples. We put a few apples, and we waited, nothing happened. We waited, nothing happened. And I think there was maybe 6 or 7 apples in that bucket. So finally I got to thinking, well, like with the chickens, there was a lot of chickens, but they only took 3. And they never took any more. And I was beginning to think, well, maybe it's the number thing. Maybe if there's a lot of something, they will take, but leave some of it. So I told Dan, well, go and buy more apples, and we'll put a lot of apples in there and see what happens. Well, in a night or two, guess what? A lot of the apples were gone, but they always left 2, 3, 4 apples in there. The rest of them were gone. And we never saw any leavings like an animal got in there. There was no pieces of apple or anything left. And it was too high for anything to get in this bucket. We think, well, coos could have done it maybe, but you thought there had been some sign of it, some apple chips or something somewhere if they were eating it. But they were just completely gone, and there were few apples left. So, okay, that worked out good. So the next thing we tried, we put some peaches out there. The thing about the peaches is we put 5 peaches out there. And the reason we put 5 peaches is because we knew at this time that there were 5 in the family. And that's another thing I'll tell you about later on, but we figured out there was 5 in the family. I'll just tell you that now. That'll fill in a little bit. The way we knew there were 5 in this family is we knew the young guy was coming. Then after we had the recording where the papa was scolding Tomas, we knew that, okay, there's the young one and there's the papa. Well, then Dan went out one day to mushroom hunt in the woods there where their structures were, and all of a sudden he heard babies crying. He said first he heard a mewing sound like a little baby, an infant, whine, and then he heard the sound of a whining toddler. Now, Dad's had 3 boys, so he knows what crying babies and toddlers sound like. So he said right after he heard these babies, he's going, what are babies doing up here? All of a sudden he heard 3 whistles. One was from where the babies were, and on each side he heard a whistle, 3 whistles all together. So now he came home and he said, okay, now we know we've got Tomas, we've got the papa, we've got a mama, and 2 babies. So there's 5. That's how we have to put 5 peaches out. And we thought, okay, maybe we should have put more peaches out, but that's all we had at the time. We weren't going to run to the store and get any more. So we put the 5 peaches out there thinking, okay, there's 1 for each of them. We didn't know if they'd take them or not. But they must really love peaches, because even though there's only 5 in there, they took every single one of those peaches, not a sign of them. No smished peaches in the bucket, no peach pits underneath, peach pits under the bucket, nothing. So we knew we had a family of 5 and we were giving them fruit. Dan even gave them a deer carcass one time, but they never touched that deer carcass, even after we told them that they could have it. And we don't know why, but maybe they're proud. Maybe they're thinking, well, we can hunt for ourselves. We don't need your leavings.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of run-down no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves in the plow, and the 5-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.